FTR 40 years, he left Emmy for a younger woman. He said I was too old. I didn't beg. I took everything he built. I still remember the morning he left like it was yesterday, though it feels like 1,000 lifetimes ago. The sunlight streamed through our bedroom window, painting everything gold, yet I felt a cold shadow settle over me. After 40 years of marriage, 40 years of shared dreams, laughter, sacrifices, and tears, he chose to leave me. For her. For someone young, vibrant, untouched by our life together. I could hear the words he said over and over in my mind. You're too old. I need someone new. Those words weren't just cruel, they cut deeper than anything I had ever felt before. I sat there, frozen, my hands gripping the silk sheets as if they could anchor me in reality. The house was silent to silent. My children were grown, living their own lives. And now I was left alone in a home that felt more like a prison than the sanctuary we had built together. And yet, somewhere in the hurt, in the anger, in the shock, a small flame of clarity flickered. I would not beg. I would not grovel. I would not let this betrayal define me. I took a deep breath and glanced around our bedroom, the pictures, the memories, the little reminders of a life I had given everything to. And that's when it hit me. This was not the end. This could be the beginning. I had spent decades building a life, quietly managing finances, nurturing relationships, cultivating my career. And now, for the first time, it was my time. My time to act. My time to claim the power I had quietly held all these years. Before I could dwell too long in despair, my phone buzzed. A message from my neighbor popped up. Are you okay? Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments. I need to know you're safe. I smiled bitterly. Yes, the world was still moving. Indifferent to my pain, but the audience, the people who would follow my story, they would understand. They would feel it. I knew he thought I was weak, that I would crumble, that I would hide in sorrow. But I had a plan forming, step by step, quietly, patiently. Revenge need not be violent. Revenge could be smart. And I had 40 years of knowledge, 40 years of observation, and 40 years of survival skills ready to unfold. I let the initial shock settle, hiding my true thoughts behind a calm expression, and began plotting not with anger, but with precision. The first step was to understand every detail of his new life, every relationship, every financial decision. I needed to know exactly what he had left behind and how I could leverage it. If he thought he could erase me, he had underestimated not only my resilience, but my intellect. As I sat there sipping my morning coffee, I realized one thing. This betrayal, as painful as it was, had awakened a part of me that had been dormant for too long. And that part would make him regret underestimating me. I looked out the window, the city bustling, life moving on as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was no longer the woman he had taken for granted. I was sharp, alert, and ready. And the moment he believed he had won, the moment he thought I would bow, I would begin the transformation that would turn his arrogance into astonishment. This was just the beginning. The story he thought ended was actually the start of my quiet, unstoppable triumph. The house had never felt so empty, yet every corner seemed to whisper reminders of him. After 40 years, he had walked away, leaving behind the life we had built together and the audacity of believing I would crumble. I kept my mornings unchanged, coffee by the window, checking emails, reviewing our finances, and observing the patterns of our world as if it were a chessboard. Every detail he overlooked, every assumption of my weakness, became a potential move in a game I was just beginning. Clara called that week. Her voice, hesitant and careful, betrayed an allegiance I had not expected. "Mom, are you okay?" I know this is hard, polite words, but too measured. I knew she was subtly protecting him. Perhaps out of convenience, perhaps out of fear. I smiled bitterly, disguising my understanding. Their underestimation would be my advantage. I began reconnecting with old colleagues, friends, and acquaintances. Not to boast, but to subtly remind them and indirectly them that I had never been weak. Meanwhile, I observed every detail of his new life, property arrangements, contracts, social connections. Small cracks appeared, details he had assumed I would ignore. Patterns of haste, gaps in documentation. Subtle oversights they were mine to exploit. Late one evening, reviewing ledgers and emails, a strategy crystallized. Revenge did not need to be loud or violent. It could be patient, clever, and ultimately irreversible. Every oversight he had made, every assumption of my passivity, became an instrument of reclamation. The realization stirred something I had not felt in years: excitement. Not anger, not desperation, but the thrill of anticipation, knowing the game was in my hands. Clara suggested a family brunch, her tone rehearsed, cautious. "Mom, come. Let's just talk. Maybe we can all make peace," I agreed calmly. Every detail already considered, what to reveal, what to withhold, and most importantly, how to observe. My silence, patience, and quiet intelligence were tools as sharp as any weapon. That night, I sat by the window, city lights flickering like distant stars. The house no longer felt heavy. It had become a canvas. On it, I would paint every move meticulously, ensuring that when they believed they had one, the truth of my power would unfold and their arrogance would be their undoing. Days passed quietly, but in that silence, my plan was already forming. He thought I was broken, passive, waiting for grief to consume me. He couldn't have been more wrong. Every morning, as I poured my coffee and watched the city wake, I mapped the subtle cracks he had left behind: rushed bank transfers, unsigned contracts, overlooked property clauses. Each was a doorway into the leverage I could wield. Patience had become my weapon, observing my shield, and my intellect the sharpest tool in the game. Then came the first real opportunity. A casual comment from Clara slipped in during a phone call. Unguarded and almost nervous, "Mom, you know, the house, he's been considering selling it. That was all I needed." Her hesitation, the slight stutter in her voice, revealed a blind spot in their arrogance. They assumed I didn't notice. They assumed I wasn't paying attention. But I had decades of experience reading between the lines, detecting the unsaid. I filed that small piece of information away it would be critical. I began reconnecting with lawyers I had trusted quietly over the years, not to confront him directly, but to understand exactly how far the legal and financial terrain could tilt in my favor. I learned that even small oversights in property, documents, and investment agreements could be leveraged. I traced accounts, reviewed past transactions, noted inconsistencies. Every detail mattered. I wasn't just surviving the betrayal, I was transforming it into a strategy. One evening, while reviewing documents, I realized something shocking. A misfiled clause in one of the contracts meant that the property he assumed under his sole control could legally be partially reclaimed. My heart raced not with anger, but with exhilaration. This wasn't luck. This was a preparation meeting opportunity. My decades of attentiveness, often dismissed by him as nagging or overcautiousness, had positioned me perfectly. Then came the social test. A family brunch arranged by Clara, under the pretense of reconciliation, was approaching. Everyone thought it would be a casual, polite encounter. But I had already planned subtle maneuvers to observe behavior, test their honesty, and plant the seeds of doubt. I smiled politely, listening to idle chatter, while noting tone, body language, even eye contact, their overconfidence, their small deceptions, their need to control the narrative. They were all visible to me. and I cataloged everything meticulously. By the time dessert arrived, I had already predicted how each person would react to specific statements, the exact points where their composure would falter. It was not cruel. It was precision. Every word, every gesture, every pause was a chess piece I could use later. My calm exterior masked the storm of strategy and intellect within. I was no longer the woman they assumed fragile. I was a silent force, quietly preparing to reclaim what had always been mine. That night, after the guests left, I sat in the quiet living room, reviewing notes and imagining the moves ahead. The realization settled in. Betrayal, as painful as it had been, had unlocked a power I had almost forgotten. I was no longer merely reacting, I was orchestrating, calculating, and positioning myself for a success that would be undeniable. And they had no idea it had begun. The game was mine, and the first moves had already been set in motion. The brunch had seemed innocent on the surface, a casual gathering to talk things over. Clara had insisted, but I knew better. I observed every gesture, every glance, every tiny slip of tone. They believed I was fragile, that the years had dulled my awareness, but the opposite was true. My mind had been sharpening silently, each moment of hurt and betrayal forging a precision I had never exercised so deliberately before. During dessert, a small comment from Clara gave me my opening. She mentioned, almost casually, that he had been rushing some property papers for the new house. He wants everything done before next week, she said. That tiny slip-on line, one thoughtless phrase was enough. They thought it was insignificant. I knew it was my first opportunity. Over the next few days, I quietly contacted a trusted attorney, someone who had guided me before. I didn't accuse. I didn't confront. I simply asked questions, requested verification of details, and began tracing where gaps in documentation could be leveraged. Each small oversight in the contracts, each assumption they had made about my passivity, became an instrument I could use. The thrill was subtle but undeniable. This was not just strategy. It was empowerment born from intelligence and patience. Meanwhile, I maintained my calm, public-facing demeanor. Friends and neighbors saw only a composed, dignified woman adjusting to change. No one suspected that each casual social interaction, each polite smile, masked careful observation and recording. I noted every weakness, hesitations in speech, inconsistencies in stories, little unguarded truths. They were cataloged in my mind like chess moves, preparing for a game only I knew I would win. One evening, I reviewed a set of property documents they had left accessible. A clause had been misfiled, an oversight that meant the new ownership transfer could be challenged. My pulse quickened not with anger, but with anticipation. This was the opening I had been waiting for. The betrayal had given me clarity and focus. And now, quietly, I was ready to make my first move. Clara called again, this time with a tone I recognized immediately. Slightly anxious, overly polite. Mom, I just wanted to see if you're okay. Maybe we can all talk again soon. I smiled internally. She had no idea how much I already knew, how much I had already seen, how much power I had quietly gathered. My calm exterior hid the storm within, the meticulous plan taking shape. That night, as the city lights shimmered beyond my window, I reflected on the subtle strike I was preparing. The first move would not be loud, dramatic, or confrontational. It would be clever, strategic, and undeniable. They would feel its impact long before they understood its source. Revenge, I realized, didn't need to scream. It needed only to be precise. By the end of the week, the first small leverage was in place. The documents, the misfiled clause, the observations all combined into a quiet but potent advantage. Every detail, every tiny oversight they had assumed I wouldn't notice, had become my silent weapon. And they had no idea it had begun. From here on, every step I took would build upon this foundation, slowly but surely ensuring that betrayal would meet consequence, not in violence, but in undeniable, clever reclamation of what was mine. The days after my first subtle strike passed quietly, but beneath the calm, the currents had shifted. They didn't notice the tremors. I had set in motion the overlooked gaps in contracts, the rushed property transfers. Clara continued her polite calls, voice slightly tighter each time. "Mom, maybe we can talk more." "I want things to be okay," she said. I smiled inwardly. Their underestimation was my greatest advantage. I began reconnecting with old colleagues and acquaintances subtly, gathering insights without raising suspicion. Casual lunches, short calls, and conversations revealed opportunities hidden from them. Each missed deadline, overconfident assumption, and careless word became valuable in my mind. While reviewing financial records, I discovered a minor error in property transfers, small but legally exploitable. Contacting my attorney quietly, I confirmed that it could shift ownership subtly back in my favor. The thrill wasn't anger but precision. Every step was calculated, every observation stored for later use. At a social gathering, I tested their reactions. A casual comment about the house and a subtle question about investments made Clara's smile falter. He tried to maintain composure, but doubt flickered in his eyes. That small interaction was enough. The ripple of my actions had begun. Later, I imagined engaging my audience. "Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below," I whispered. This betrayal, as painful as it was, had turned into empowerment. Every small consequence, every crack in their confidence, was proof that patience, observation, and strategy would win. They had underestimated me for decades, and now the slow unveiling of truth had begun. The ripple I had set in motion was now growing, almost imperceptible to them, yet impossible to ignore. Clara's careful smiles, his forced confidence, it all betrayed the unease I had planted. They believed they had control, but I was quietly steering every interaction, every opportunity, every move in my favor. Their arrogance, their assumptions about my fragility, were the most powerful tools in my hands. One evening, I stumbled upon a revelation that changed everything. While reviewing some old documents and emails, I noticed a hidden clause in a long-forgotten investment contract. A loophole they assumed was insignificant now became a weapon of immense leverage. It wasn't just about property anymore, it was about reputation, credibility, and influence. The realization sent a shiver of exhilaration through me. I wasn't reacting to betrayal anymore. I was orchestrating consequences that would be undeniable, precise, and irreversible. I decided it was time to test my leverage in a controlled setting. Another family gathering loomed, one that they believed would be casual and safe. I approached it with measured calm, each word, gesture, and glance carefully considered. During the conversation, I subtly referenced the overlooked contracts and financial decisions, gauging their reactions. Clara's eyes widened slightly, and he stammered under the weight of unspoken accountability. My calm, intelligent demeanor masked the storm within. The tension escalated when a mutual friend inadvertently revealed a detail about his hurried new investments. I listened, noting every discrepancy, every contradiction. Each tiny slip of information was a building block for my strategy. The pieces were falling perfectly into place. Betrayal had been their mistake. Underestimation had been mine. And now the scales were tipping slowly, methodically toward me. Even in private, I continued analyzing every detail. I mapped potential outcomes, predicted reactions, and planned the precise moments to act. My mind raced with possibilities, but never with rashness. This was about intelligence, patience, and timing. Every move I made in the social and legal arenas, was a calculated step toward reclaiming what was. My nan teaching them the cost of their arrogance. By the week's end, the consequences of my quiet maneuvers began to manifest subtly. Mistakes they had assumed harmless now carried the weight of exposure. Anxiety replaced confidence. Hesitation replaced bravado. My first move had been strategic, but now the impact of the second, more intricate maneuver was unfolding. They were beginning to understand, silently, that their underestimation had been catastrophic. And through it all, I maintained my composed exterior, engaging with the world, reconnecting with friends, and quietly observing reactions. My mind was always active, always planning, and the knowledge that each step brought me closer to ultimate reclamation of power filled me with controlled exhilaration. Betrayal had awakened not pain alone, but the sharpness of intellect, the clarity of vision, and the thrill of a plan unfolding exactly as intended. The final pieces had fallen into place. Months of careful observation, subtle maneuvers, and quiet intelligence had built a web too intricate to escape. They still thought they were in control, still thought my patience meant weakness. They didn't realize that every oversight, every careless assumption, and every tiny misstep had been carefully cataloged, analyzed, and now turned into leverage. I made my move publicly but subtly, ensuring that the impact was undeniable without ever appearing aggressive. A formal review of the property and financial documents revealed the errors they had ignored for decades. Clauses they assumed harmless now shifted ownership and influence quietly but decisively into my favor. Clara and he watched, stunned, as the realization unfolded. The woman they believed powerless had orchestrated an outcome no one had expected. The elegance of the revenge lay in its subtlety. No yelling, no confrontation, no rash actions. Instead, the law, logic, and precision had become my instruments. Each miscalculation they had made was now a reflection of their arrogance, their underestimation, and their betrayal. The satisfaction was not in vindictiveness, but in justice delivered through intelligence, patience, and foresight. As the days passed, the tension around them grew. Friends, neighbors, even colleagues began noticing the shift. Their carefully constructed image of control cracked under the weight of quiet consequences I had orchestrated. Clara approached me, tentative, eyes wide with realization. "Mom, I didn't know you." She trailed off, unsure. I smiled gently, my calm exterior belying the storm of triumph inside. No words were needed. The results spoke for themselves. I took a quiet moment one evening, looking out over the city lights, reflecting on the journey. Betrayal had been devastating, yet it had revealed the strength, intelligence, and resilience I hadn't fully acknowledged in myself. Every observation, every subtle action, every patient calculation had led to this empowerment, justice, and a reclamation of dignity that no one could ever take away. And just like that, life felt balanced again, not because revenge had been dramatic or destructive, but because it had been precise, clever, and undeniable. I had turned betrayal into triumph, heartbreak into empowerment, and patience into a tool sharper than any weapon. They had learned, finally, the cost of underestimating the woman they thought was fragile. I smiled, thinking about those who had followed my story, imagining them watching, feeling every emotion, every tension, every twist. Until next time, see you in the next video.